The headlines scream American decline, $36 trillion in debt.
The national debt stands currently at about $36.2 trillion, and every day the U.S. spends about $2.6 billion paying the interest on that debt.
Crumbling roads, China spending trillions on infrastructure, while Washington argues over everything. But here's what they're missing. The structural math, the geography, the money flows, the hard power that doesn't change with headlines, tells a very different story. In 2026, three forces are quietly reshaping the global order. And by the end of this year, the question won't be, why did America decline? It'll be, why did everyone get the prediction so wrong? Let's start with what everyone sees. The conventional wisdom. America's national debt is approaching $36 trillion. That's more than the entire economy produces in a year. Infrastructure? The American Society of Civil Engineers keeps giving the country mediocre grades, roads crumbling, bridges failing, power grids fragile. Meanwhile, China has spent over $1.3 trillion on Belt and Road, building ports, railways, and power plants in 150-plus countries. They're literally constructing the infrastructure of the future while America debates which potholes to fix. The political system looks broken, constant gridlock, historic polarization, and the industrial base that once powered American dominance? Hollowed out, shipped overseas, rusting. This is the story you hear everywhere. American decline, the end of an empire. But what if the entire narrative is missing something fundamental? The global order, the one you depend on for trade, currency stability, security, rests on structural advantages that don't appear in headlines. Advantages that are baked into the land itself, the rivers, the oceans, the mathematics of power. So let me show you three forces the headlines ignore. Three reasons why, in 2026, America may be positioned not for decline, but for relative dominance. Let's start with the map. Because geography is the ultimate constraint on national power. And in this game, America was dealt the best hand in history. The Mississippi River system, one of the most commercially navigable river networks on Earth. It connects the agricultural heartland, the Great Plains, directly to the Gulf of Mexico. Cheap, flat, easy transport for thousands of miles. This isn't just a nice feature, it's an economic superpower. In 1803, Thomas Jefferson bought this land from France for what would be $340 million today. The Louisiana Purchase, what's it worth now? There's no real way to calculate it, but economists estimate the value of that land at over $60 trillion in productive capacity. This is why America produces food surpluses that feed the world. Not just because of good farming, because the geography makes it cheap to grow and transport. Food security equals economic security. Always has. Now zoom out. America has access to two oceans, the Atlantic and the Pacific. Natural deep water ports all along both coasts, carved by glaciers during the last ice age. Boston, New York, Baltimore, Norfolk, Houston, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Seattle. Compare that to China. One ocean, the Pacific. And that access is gated by a chain of countries, Japan, Taiwan, the Philippines, Vietnam, that range from unfriendly to hostile. 80% of China's oil imports pass through one choke point, the Malacca Strait, a narrow passage between Malaysia and Indonesia that could be closed in hours during a conflict. China knows this. It's why they've spent decades and tens of billions trying to secure overland routes to the Indian Ocean. The Karakoram Highway through Pakistan, rail lines through Myanmar, billions spent. And still, China can't drive a truck from its interior to a port it fully controls on a second ocean. Russia? Even worse, they're landlocked by ice for half the year. Their warm water ports, accessed through narrow straits controlled by NATO allies. The Bosphorus, the Danish Straits. Russia's entire Middle East policy is partly about keeping access to one Syrian port on the Mediterranean. America sits 3,000 miles from Europe, 4,500 miles from Asia, surrounded by two massive oceans and friendly neighbors. It's the only major developed economy that hasn't had to rebuild from invasion in over 150 years. Here's the key insight. Geography doesn't change. Not with elections, not with policy, not with headlines. And in 2026, these constraints are still in place. China is still boxed in. Russia still lacks reliable ocean access. America still sits protected with unmatched food production and global trade reach. That's force number one. Now let's follow the money. Everyone talks about American debt, and yes, $36 trillion is real. But let's look at what the market is actually pricing in for 2026. This year, Americans vote in midterm elections. All 435 House seats, 35 Senate seats, governors, state legislatures. Here's the historical pattern. The president's party almost always loses ground in midterms. It's happened in 20 of the last 22 midterm cycles going back to 1938. The only exceptions? 2002 after 9/11, when Bush had 63% approval, and 1998 when Republicans tried to impeach Clinton despite his 66% approval. Right now, President Trump's approval sits at negative territory, around 45% approval, 50 to 52% disapproval, depending on the poll. That's a net negative of 5 to 8 points. What does this mean? Historically, midterms act as a political reset, a structural check. The party in power loses seats, gridlock increases, and paradoxically, markets often stabilize. Why? Because gridlock limits extreme policy swings. No massive spending bills, no radical reforms, just friction. The thing everyone complains about, the messiness of the American system, turns out to be a pressure release valve. Now let's talk about the dollar. Despite decades of de-dollarization talk, the U.S. dollar still represents the majority of global reserves, nearly 60%. That's more than the next 3 currencies combined. Why hasn't anything replaced it? The Eurozone is fragmented, countries with different economies, different debt levels, constant political tension. The Chinese yuan, not fully convertible. China maintains capital controls. You can't freely move money in and out. The dollar remains the ultimate safe haven, not because America has no problems, but because there's no viable alternative at scale. In 2026, that hasn't changed. And China. Everyone talks about China rising, but look closer. The country faces structural headwinds that don't make headlines. Demographic contraction, the population is shrinking. Debt overhangs from decades of infrastructure spending. A property sector crisis that wiped out trillions in household wealth. China's growth is slowing, not collapsing, but slowing to 4 to 5% range. That's a plateau, not a crash, but it changes the competitive timeline. The window for aggressive moves, Taiwan, South China Sea expansion, narrows as domestic problems pile up. Meanwhile, America is reshoring. The CHIPS Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, tens of billions flowing into semiconductor manufacturing, battery production, advanced manufacturing. Real factories being built on U.S. soil for the first time in decades. Here's the stat everyone gets wrong. Yes, America lost manufacturing jobs, millions of them, but U.S. manufacturing output, it's doubled since the 1980s. The jobs didn't disappear because of China. They disappeared because of automation, robots, productivity. The reveal: America isn't winning because it has no problems. It's positioned to outperform because its rivals' structural challenges are deeper. Geography, currency dominance, and relative economic health. These are the forces determining outcomes in 2026. But there's a third force, the one that makes it all enforceable. In 2026, winning isn't about invasions. It's about leverage, and leverage comes from capability. The United States operates the world's most advanced integrated air fleet, not just advanced planes, integrated systems. F-35s, F-22s, B-2 Spirits, and the new B-21 Raiders, all sharing data in real time. Here's what that means. A sensor in the air can cue a strike from the sea. A drone can pass a target directly to artillery hundreds of miles away. It's networked warfare. The entire military fights as one system, not separate branches. Most countries can't do this, even allies. They operate on incompatible radios, different software, separate command structures. In peacetime, that's manageable. In combat, deadly. Then there's the Navy. America operates 11 nuclear-powered supercarriers. The rest of the world combined has maybe 10 to 12, depending on how you count light carriers. Most are smaller, older, or use ski jump ramps instead of catapult systems. And submarines. Virginia-class attack subs. Silent. More advanced than anything else in the water. They can sit off enemy coasts undetected for months. Here's why this matters. The ability to secure sea lanes and choke points creates deterrence capacity. Not about blocking trade, about ensuring free flow, which, by the way, benefits U.S. allies and the global economy. China knows this. Their entire military strategy is built around keeping the U.S. Navy away from their coast. Anti-ship missiles, submarines, mines, an anti-access/area denial bubble. But China's vulnerability is asymmetric. If sea lanes close, whether by choice or conflict, China's economy chokes. No oil, no food imports, no exports. America, self-sufficient in food and energy, net exporter of both. In 2026, this translates to real leverage. NATO summit in Turkey in July, G20 in Miami in December. These aren't just photo ops, they're negotiations. And military superiority translates directly to negotiating power. In a multipolar world, the country that can project power globally while remaining secure at home holds the ultimate advantage. That's not propaganda. That's the math of force. So here's what the structural math shows. 3 forces working in America's favor in 2026. Force 1, geographic determinism. Food security, energy independence, natural defenses. 2, ocean access. These don't change with elections or policy. They're baked into the land, and no rival can replicate them. Force 2, the political system as safety valve. Midterms force corrections. Gridlock prevents extreme policy swings. The friction everyone complains about, it's actually stabilizing. It's what prevents the catastrophic failures we're watching elsewhere. Force 3, relative competition. China faces demographic contraction, debt overhangs, and slowing innovation momentum. Europe struggles with energy dependence and fiscal fragmentation. Russia is stuck in Ukraine, bleeding resources and talent. America isn't perfect, far from it. But in a world of relative decline, structural advantages compound. Geography that can't be changed, a currency no one can replace, a military no coalition can match, and a political system messy enough to avoid dictatorship but stable enough to preserve continuity. Here's the uncomfortable truth the headlines miss. In a contest of who declines slower, America's starting position is unmatched, and that matters more than the noise. So what does this mean for 2026? Let's make it practical. For markets, the dollar likely remains the dominant reserve currency. U.S. equities positioned for relative outperformance. Yes, with volatility, but outperformance relative to alternatives. Infrastructure plays, defense tech, and domestic manufacturing sectors all benefit. For geopolitics, China's window for aggressive moves narrows. The demographic and economic problems make risky gambles more costly. Russia is forced toward negotiated settlements in Ukraine. The costs of continuing outweigh the benefits. The global south continues to hedge, building ties with China, with Russia, with regional powers. But the U.S. orbit remains central. Why? Because the dollar, the Navy, and the food surplus create dependencies that rhetoric doesn't erase. For you, the person watching this, headlines capture drama. Structure captures outcomes. The same media that breathlessly reports every crisis often misses the underlying forces that actually determine what happens. Betting against America has historically been expensive. In the 1930s, the Great Depression was supposed to end U.S. dominance. Didn't happen. In the 1970s, stagflation and Vietnam were the end. Didn't happen. In the 2000s, Iraq and the financial crisis. Still here. Not because America is perfect, but because structural advantages, geography, resources, systems, outlast headlines. And in 2026, those advantages remain intact. Now you see the forces the headlines miss. The geography that doesn't change, the economic math that favors stability, the military deterrence that creates leverage. So here's my question for you. Which force do you think matters most in 2026? The geography, the economics, the military power? Drop a comment. If you want more videos that follow the money and connect the dots, investigations that go beyond the headlines, hit subscribe. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.